All right. Welcome, everybody, to tonight's Flameless Fireside podcast. I'm your host, Everett, along with our other hosts, our dating life coach, Celeste, our co host, Joyce, and we got a special guest with us tonight, Chris. Chris, how do you say your last name? Is it Yuen? Did I say that right? Or did I totally butcher it? We'll take that as a yes. Okay. So, tonight we are going to be talking about a topic that is, for some reason, a little bit sensitive. For obvious reasons, it's very sensitive. But for some people, this is something that really hits home for them and can become a really difficult situation. We're going to be talking about never being married in the church and what that looks like, how that is. We've got Joyce on with us tonight and Chris to discuss this topic with us because they have some vested interest in the matter. So thank you guys for being willing to come on and being willing to talk to us. Chris, it looks like you're having a few technical issues. Can you hear us yet? I'm guessing that's a no.
He was earlier, so I'm not sure what's going on.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So, can you hear us yet? Okay. Let me see if I just take him out and add him back into the stream. Maybe that'll work. I don't know. Can you hear us yet, Chris? No. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll work with Chris to see if we can get him up and rolling. Looks like he's got a couple things on his end. You're going.
Yeah, he's muted.
First and foremost, before we dive into tonight's topic, thank you everybody for tuning in. I think most people usually tune in on us with YouTube now, which is pretty nice. But if you have not done so already, go to our YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button and the bell notification to get notified when we're coming up with new live videos and when we post other videos, as we upload content quite often. So we're happy to have you with us tonight. Give us a thumbs up if you like what you hear here tonight. So thank you very much for joining us. Okay, diving into tonight's topic, never been married. This is a tough one.
Yeah. So you know what? It is. And I'm going to start with a story, just to kind of kick it off. But I have a friend who is a lifelong friend. He's my cousin's best friend. And he was my first crush at 15. And so I've known him my whole life. And when we were in our 30s, he was divorced and he came to Atlanta to visit. And we went out and got some food at Eatsy's and went over to Stone Mountain to watch the laser show. So fun stuff that we were kind of doing. And as we're sitting there in the grass, getting ready for this laser show, he starts to tell me this story about his aunt. And he says to me, he literally says the words, she was like the spinster type. And as soon as he said that, I was like, And so I said to him, so spinster type, what exactly does that mean? And he started to say, well, someone who's, and then he literally paused, realizing he had said the wrong thing. And so I wasn't offended by it. I thought it was really amusing. And then for the rest of our lives, I've continued to refer to myself as his favorite spinster or his spinster friend or so on, because it bothers him way more than it bothers me. But one of the reasons I bring that up is that I think that sometimes when we talk about never been married, and then there's so many other phrases, even just the idea of never been married, not hasn't been married yet, but just never married kind of thing. And old maid, and there are these derogatory terms. And I think for women, you think of those and you have this picture of the Victorian woman who couldn't find a mate because she was too shy and awkward. And so she ends up spending her life being her, her nieces and nephews' governess or whatever. And so I think the first thing I would say to people is you have to think differently. We live in a very different world. And if you've got a negative connotation of, wow, someone's not married because they're not all of these things. And that's not to say there aren't reasons behind it, because sometimes there are, sometimes they're traumatic reasons, sometimes they're just opportunities. But I think we have to redefine how we think about people who've never married, because it's far more normal than it used to be. And I know women who are beautiful, successful, talented, who just have never been married. And so we've got to kind of think about the way we think about people who've never been married. It's not because there's something wrong with them. Sometimes it's because they've chosen to be that. Sometimes it's just because their life took them in a different direction. But I think the place I would always ask people to start is by get rid of those stereotypes. Get rid of the way that you've sort of thought about, oh, never married, and really start to think about it differently. So
I think that's a good point. Just real quick, Chris, are you back with us? Can you hear us?
Yep, I'm live. I'm ready.
All right, awesome.
Fantastic. All right, great. Happy to have you back.
You won't just have a confused face on a box.
I know, we're like,
what happened there. Every now and then it just sort of glitches, and if you just kind of exit out and come back in, seems to kind of fix whatever's ailing it. So, welcome back. So, Joyce just brought up a good point that there's kind of a stigma around people who are, we'll just use the term never been married, NBMs, a lot of times people sort of think that there's something wrong with them, or that's kind of the knee-jerk reaction. Have you run into that in your personal life, Chris? Have people been like, why haven't you ever been married? Like they kind of look at you maybe a little crossways, like, what's wrong with this guy?
Sure, right? Like there's always that mindset that you've heard that once you get past a certain age, it's like parking stalls, right? All the good ones are taken, and
oh gosh,
the rest are handicapped, right?
Oh.
And it's not a very nice thing to say, but that's I think the approach that a lot of people have in the back of their mind, that like, hey, if it didn't work out for you, what was wrong? Why weren't you one of the good ones?
Right. I mean, I would be readily one to admit that I absolutely kind of had that view for the longest time. Especially, I kind of had this rule, like especially guys who have gone through BYU, right? If you've gone through BYU and you went there for 4 years and you did your thing, I was like, well, there's so many people. How is it possible that you went through BYU and you didn't find somebody, So that was kind of like my own bias. Like I used to just think that somehow something was wrong, but I started meeting people who they would get into a long-term relationship with somebody and they kind of had all these expectations like, well, I think that's where we're headed with this. And so they sort of passed up other dates. They didn't really, move forward with other opportunities. And then it fell apart, but then they were done with BYU. And so that kind of blew my theory out of the water, right?
Well, I think that. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think this topic, it just is very touchy for our culture. I think since our church focuses so much on eternal families and being sealed to someone and being sealed to children, and like that is like, and it's obviously important, but we always kind of consider it's just this time frame. Like there's eternities for these things to happen. But I think sometimes that's why there's this kind of side glance at people, because we're almost like, well, don't you want to be sealed to your family? I mean, don't you know you can't go to the highest level of celestial kingdom unless you're sealed to somebody, and it becomes this like judgment zone. Like, obviously you're choosing not to make this come about. Don't you want to be righteous? And it's wrong.
And I think we share a lot in common with people who are trying to have kids and can't, because everyone sits at church and sort of looks at them and is like, well, why aren't they doing that? And they don't know the struggle and the heartbreak behind the scenes. And, they just kind of make a lot of assumptions. Like I'm always very careful when I meet someone who asks me, well, do you have any kids? Because, the first question, have you been married, or how many times have you been, or whatever. And so, and then I'll get, have you had any kids? And I'm always really careful to say, oh, I don't have any kids of my own, but, I have a lot of children who are in my life, because I don't want them to entertain for a second the idea that I'm not married because I don't really like kids, because that's so not the truth. And so that may be a defense, for me, but that's okay. I just wanted to be, perfectly clear. I am not married and don't have kids, not because I was trying to avoid it. So, do people have the right to make that judgment? Of course not, of course not. But it's sort of like someone who's trying to have kids and can't sometimes feels like they need to explain themselves. Should they have to? No, they shouldn't.
No, they shouldn't have to. But again, it's that culture, right? And the truth is, I've talked with people who would love to deal with people who don't have kids.
Right.
You know, they're like, I don't want to have to take that on. And so I think that, again, it's our outlook. It's the way we're viewing it. And I think that the culture is very strong on this topic. And it can definitely steer judgmental thoughts no matter what. And I think the more we're willing to kind of just open our minds to, hey, everyone's on their own path, and guess what, they're in charge of their own path. You know, just let them be. You know, let them live their lives. And just not fear, like, oh my gosh, what if they end up in the celestial kingdom because they didn't get married or whatever, you know?
Well, and I know that, like, while the culture is so punishing in a way, or can be, I don't think it always is, but can be, I do think that when we look at the doctrine on the matter, it actually is very comforting. You know, that if we are living and we don't have, you know, living the gospel the way we should, and we don't have the opportunity, nothing will be withheld from us in the hereafter. And so that's, you know, it's a very beautiful doctrine, but that's not necessarily kind of how people as members in the culture approach that. So.
Absolutely. Chris, I want to get your opinion on this. You know, I know you're always opinionated, as it says under your name.
That's what I hear.
You know, how do you feel about, you know, the stereotypes for never been marrieds?
I can't give Joyce's answer. I think that if I tell people I have a lot of kids in my life and then I'm single, that's going to look weird. So that's not really a good option for me. But, you know, the interesting thing, and I was speaking to someone recently about this, for a guy, being a single guy that's never been married, that doesn't have kids, is probably one of the least attractive features. You would think that it would be a benefit because somebody wouldn't think that you have the baggage of kids, right? But it actually isn't. Like, women would actually prefer that I have kids, because then it would show that I've already been selected by someone else and that I can take care of a kid. And so if I could change things up in like the snap of fingers, I would have a kid, and it would actually make my dating life better.
That's interesting. You know, and it sort of leads us into, I want to pop this question up here from Laura in the audience. She says, I often thought guys would prefer their second marriage to be with someone who's never been married. You know, so does it work in reverse to what you're saying? If you see a girl with kids, is that a turnoff for you? Or would you actually prefer somebody thinking, okay, at least they've been selected at one point? How do you feel about that on the other end?
So I'm just going to speak for myself. I'm not going to make assumptions about guys in general. But for me, when I see that a girl has kids, the big thing that I'm considering is what considerations will I have to make for that father that's still in their lives or isn't, right? I need to know whether or not, like, I can, if that person lives far away, if they can move, right? Do they have custody agreements to say they can't move? Or am I going to have to kill a psychopath that tries to break into my house one day? You know, those simple types of questions that that come along with someone having kids. And I'm actually pretty understanding about the fact that, of course, any guy that's a good guy should be concerned about what men are being brought into his kid's life. And so, you know, it's really that I want to be able to ask a whole bunch of other questions when I find out someone has kids, and I can't because early on you just haven't built up the trust to where you can ask those questions yet. And so but it's not a turnoff for me at all if somebody has kids. Now, a big part for me, because I want to be able to have kids of my own as well, is, are they willing to have more kids, right?
Yeah.
They have 5 kids and for them it's a wrap. That's going to be a problem for me. Now, for a lot of guys, it isn't, right? A lot of guys don't want to have kids, or they're happy just, you know, having a couple of teenagers that are going to be out of the house in a couple of years and, you know, just assisting in that area. But for me, I want to know, what adjustments does my life have to make to your kids? I'm willing to make adjustments. I'm willing to make sacrifices. That's fine. And then, are you willing to have them?
That's good. Well, I think it definitely sounds like you have given this some thought. So, but I want to ask the girls
a little bit.
You guys, this question though.
Yeah.
Let's put yourself in a situation where you're dating a guy, and you find out he's never been married, no kids, and you've got kids. How is that for you? Is that kind of a, I don't really know. I know for girls, sometimes it's like, I don't know how he's going to be with my kids. You know, I don't know
Okay.
what kind of father he'll be.
Well, I
What do
think
you
I'm
think?
pretty much the only one who can answer this at this moment. So here's the thing. So when I first hit the dating realm, you know, I did hang out with someone who was single and had never had kids. He had never been married. You know, the thought was in my head, granted, obviously he was a little younger, so I was trying to figure that out as well. But the thought was though, if he ever met my kids, how would he react to my kids? I think that was what it was. I mean, because some men, I mean, they just have great paternal instincts and they love to care for kids. And it doesn't matter if they don't have their own physically, they would end up being a great stepfather. So in the end, if I would have ever been, you know, introduced him to my children, that would have been for me, you know, a make or break. Now, if he was irritated all the time and didn't want him in his space and all of those things, then that wouldn't have worked. But I would never have just, you know, like dismissed him because he didn't have children or because he hadn't been married. Because I think as we talk tonight, there's just so many different reasons as to why that can be. And to just assume it's somebody who's completely broken and not worth your time is a horrible mistake. And if you look past people like that and just judge them, you might be missing out on, you know, a diamond. And, you know, like, hey, this person could be perfect for your life. And you might not want to look past them because of that simple reason.
So Everett, I want to answer this one too, because
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
while I'm not a single mom, I've dated so many single moms now. And so I know how they approach the situation with kids. And it's always a situation where I have to wear kid gloves in the sense of what I'm willing to say. And so at the beginning, anything that can seem like there's any sort of edge to your opinion, they're going to reject and take as a red flag. Every time, 100%. They're going to say, anytime you look impatient, anytime you express an opinion about children, right? I could be saying something that's funny and making a joke. For example, I worked in primary for 6 years in my current ward, and I love working with those kids, but I hate the sound of children singing because they're terrible at it. And so I had to go suffer through singing time like every single week. And it was just a misery. And if I make that comment, they're going to take it in the worst light possible. They're gonna read it as whatever red flag they can. And so I have to be really careful about that. I think that in the case of most of these women, what they want is they want a man that's going to support them and not try and step in and be their kid's dad, but be a support structure for them as a mother. And so it's a little bit difficult for me personally, because I know that when I'm looking at the idea of creating a family, right, I'm one piece, and if they have children already, they already have their kind of pre-molded family, but I'm trying to create something brand new, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to create a structure that's a new family structure that I just want to be the best family structure possible. And so I don't want to take along bad habits. I want to just take along the good stuff, improve on the bad stuff, that sort of thing. But oftentimes they will take offense as though you're viewing them as a bad parent if you want to make adjustments that are improvements. They're gonna have a problem with that. And so
They're going to take offense. Like, what are you trying to say about my parenting skills? How do you know? You don't have any kids. You don't know how it is to parent kids. That'll be the route. Yeah.
And I'm somebody that I'm viewing it from like that, 30,000 foot view, and I see what's working for parents and what isn't. And yeah, I don't know your kids as well, but that doesn't mean that I haven't seen, tons of kids in my life and the parents that have raised them and what works and what doesn't. And I'll tell you that I'm never going to be part of a family where the kids are running the adults. That's just not going to happen for me ever. And so if somebody is in that situation because they've been a single mom and they've had to make adjustments and concessions because they just don't have the energy to battle their kids constantly because they don't have a partner that's helping, I understand why they made those concessions, right? I'm compassionate to that, right? But that doesn't mean that they're going to run me the same way they run you. And so I think my perspective on kids, very succinctly for families in general, is I believe kids should be a priority, but they should not be the center of the family, right? I want to create a marriage where I'm creating a bond with my spouse that's going to last in the eternities, where kids get a good example and they can then one day move on and create their own families. And in the end, the families that I see that have a lot of problems are the ones where the kids are running the show. And that's just me looking at it from a distance.
Well, just look at society right now, and that validates what you're saying on that one.
It's true.
Sure.
Joyce, jump in here. I know you got something
Yeah,
to say.
I've tried 3 times. So no,
No,
that's
you're
okay.
fine.
So what I wanted to say is, so I grew up being raised by my mom and my stepdad. And one of the really important things that I learned and that I hope to take into a marriage, because I'll be honest, having children of my own at this point, that train has left the station. So we're just going to be clear about that. Sad that I didn't have that opportunity, but I would love to be a stepmom. And even more, I would love to be a step grandmother. Like that is like, they talk about, my mom says, if I'd have known how much fun grandkids could be, I'd have had them first. I'm like, that is the recipe. Like that's how you do that. So I would love to do that. But one of the things that I learned is that as a step parent, you're a step parent. And so when it comes to discipline, when it comes to, difficult conversations, that needs to come from the biological parent. And so even though I really loved my stepdad and, we had, I think, a pretty good blending of families, it's still, my mom was the disciplinarian, because it sometimes created rancor between my mom and dad if he was trying to correct us for the exact reason that Chris was talking about it. That's tough. That's really hard. But I also wanted to say that, it's a really sort of funny construct, but because it's a double standard, totally a double standard. But I don't want to marry someone who's not been married before, not because I think there's anything wrong with them, but because I didn't have children and I would love to have children as part of my life. And so someone who hasn't been married and hasn't had children, I'm like the mix for me would be I'd much rather marry someone who's had kids. I want that in my life. But I recognize that it creates its own challenge. And as someone who's been independent, lived on my own for quite a long time, there's no question that adjusting to having a house full of kids would be really tough. And so, but that doesn't mean it's not something I want to do. Just because I'm at the age that I am, in my 50s doesn't mean I don't want to have kids in the home. Because I haven't had that opportunity. I would love to. But I also, one other thing I've said to people, many times before is you better be careful about how quickly you introduce me to your children, because I promise you I'll fall in love with them, maybe even more than you. So be careful. Just be careful.
I can see that in you.
Well, so this brings up another question. I want to kind of go back a little bit to what Chris was saying, that if a woman has kids, then they're not looking at you to be a dad. They're looking at you kind of a little bit differently. But that brings up a question. Does age matter at that point? Because I have known girls who have very young kids, like maybe a year, 2 years old, they're divorced, whatever. And suddenly they're looking at you like, I'm going to count on this person to help me raise this child. And it takes on a whole different dynamic versus like, hey, I've got teenagers and I don't really need you to help me raise them per se, but you will be in their life at the same time. What do you think, Celeste?
That I see the struggle. I think when there's a little one that is small and that the new parent is going to be a massive part of their life and actually help raise them and mold them, that is a really important discussion beforehand. Like that is, we need to be honest here. We need to be open. We need to really discuss how would we parent this child? How would we parent if we chose to have our own child? That can be a challenge because if someone already has children and they're like Joyce is saying, they've already parented in one way. And so the parent that's biological might just continue that style of parenting. But if another one comes into the mix, do things alter? Do they change? Does that child have a different set of rules? I mean, there's a lot of discussion that needs to happen. But I have no doubt if there's two people who are devoted to their children or to their future children or to each other's children, however you want to place it or say it, like I think there's a way. I think there's always a way, as long as someone isn't going to try to dominate the picture, dominate the other person's children or whatever. But I do agree with Chris that the children should not be the center of the marriage. I think that is a big issue in our society. The children are the center of everyone's lives, and these little kids just think they're the sun. And then when reality hits, they get out in life and they're not, and they realize, oh, I'm just the same as everybody else. Like, it's a really huge and difficult transition. So I absolutely think that the marriage comes first, but I do think there's a very important discussion, maybe many discussions about that topic before any type of engagement or marriage comes about.
And I will say that with my mom and my stepdad, the thing that I learned is that despite the fact that my mom was a disciplinarian, my mom kind of, she was the one who had the difficult conversations. My stepdad still very much thought of us. I mean, he raised us. He still thought of us as his own. He went from having 2 children to having 7 children. So, he very much my parents actually, when they were sealed, my father wouldn't allow my stepdad to adopt us, despite, not having any custodial care for quite some time. But he said, oh, on this church thing, whatever. And so after we were sealed in the temple, we kind of were like, well, last names don't really matter that much. And so every bit, he was my dad. But, we still, despite that, they still had a separation just because it avoided certain kinds of conflict. And so I appreciate that I sort of was raised in that situation, because what I know is how valuable a step parent can be and how deep those relationships can grow. And so just sort of saying, well, they're your kids, I think despite being the step parent, you can have a really important role in children's lives. And that, that's, again, I don't mean to have a double standard to say I wouldn't marry a guy who was never married. It isn't about them. It's really about, I would really love to have someone who brought children into my life. So,
yeah. So I want to kind of put one thing up here, because I think there's also a stigma and kind of a general belief that never been marrieds are sort of a rare breed in the church. Not so. You are correct. So,
I was going to say, nope.
This is a study from 2013. But I want to post this up here. This is from LDSmag.com, LDS Magazine. Are you now married, widowed, divorced, separated, or never married? And when you look at the very last number there from this, again, 2013, but I would imagine that in the last 10 years, this number may have actually increased a little bit. But you see over 50% of singles. Yeah. This was a study done on singles. More than 50% of them have never been married, which I was surprised at that.
Yeah, I guess my question is, what is the age? Like, are we talking 18 or are we starting at 31? Because whether it's 18 or 31, a big bulk of that number is probably going to come from the younger end, where it's, if the age of marriage within the church is going up, then that, just by virtue of the fact that all of those younger people are, under a certain age, 100% of them are going to be never married. So yeah, it would be interesting to see kind of how that all breaks down, because I think it's higher than we think, but that 56% seems like really high.
I think it's probably 18 plus, but this is what's interesting. When the 50%, 51% of singles, of adults in the church are single, came out a few years back. The irony is the majority of those people are actually over 35. So I know we kind of think, well, are we talking like RMs here and stuff? But truthfully, those people do end up kind of getting married sooner. It's kind of the people that get a little older and haven't been married that kind of maintain that singlehood. So yes, I'm sure it's probably 18 plus, but I have a feeling that a lot of them are probably ages that a little older age than we would believe them to be.
Yeah.
So just for a little bit of context on that was posted from a mid-singles group. So I believe it was mid-single age and up. Yeah. But they didn't specify specifically. So
and I think that what it is, is it's amongst those singles, have they ever, and so you're already getting only singles in there. But even considering that, the spike in singles throughout the church, I mean, is massive, and it's something the church, you see the church making adjustments to it, saying, hey, we need to start giving these people real callings and grown-up callings, and stop freezing them on what they can do because they happen to be in the single category.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think those are all singles, and then they're just saying, have you been married previously? And you've got 56 that said, no, I've never been married. I agree with that. It's probably what it is.
Yeah. But I think the whole point of that, again, 10-year-old data, et cetera, and we got all these things. The entire point of that survey is to highlight what Chris was saying, that this is way more common than we realize. And when we look at the data, I mean, you can see, Google it quickly, and you can see that people are getting married later and later, even in the church. Some people are just holding out entirely for getting married. So I don't think it's nearly uncommon.
Why do you think?
Why do I think people are getting
like why do we think
guys
this
think,
age
Chris?
is moving out? Why do you think that people are choosing, if they choose not to get married? What do you think is happening there? Like it is getting, more and more. Obviously outside the church there's a lot of cohabitating, but we're talking within the church. Why do you think that number is getting bumped out?
It's because Satan's winning the culture war. It's really simple. Children are looked at as a burden that interfere with your ability to have more material things, your ability to travel and be worldly. Children are an interruption in that. It's because laws are structured in such a way where marriage is a terrible deal, in the sense of somebody being able to get married, right? The nightmare for me is I get married. I want to provide for a family. I work hard. I'm committed to work. And because I can't give every ounce of attention or into every desire she has, then she doesn't feel connection anymore. And because of that, she goes out and strays in the marriage. And then, she has a degree because women are empowered now. And so, she's going to go out and be able to make her own money. So she doesn't feel any ties to me. And because of that, she can then file for divorce. I think it's 70-80% of divorces are filed by women. The overwhelming majority have college degrees. And then, if I've been providing and doing what I'm supposed to do, then obviously that taxes my income massively in the future, right? Marriage legally is a bad deal. It's a bad contract. So why would we undertake it? Why are we so insane? I'm that insane because I recognize an eternal value.
Right. And I think that I also think this also ties into, in my opinion, just again, that whole self-centeredness that's come out in our society. And I think that parents who have created, these generations coming up, I think they meant well to give them everything and to give them maybe everything they didn't have, and to make sure they had a cushy life that didn't affect them in a negative way. I mean, I get it as a parent, like you don't want to see your child hurt and struggle, but I think then with that comes this, oh, well, I deserve perfection and I deserve to have, the perfect spouse. And, there's a lot of that goes into that as well, where like, who are you looking for, and
if I waited this long, why would I settle now? Yeah, that sort of thing.
That it becomes more of, well, I'm doing well without, and I don't want to settle. And I have my list. And I don't think there's anything
right.
Well,
and I was having a conversation with a member of my state presidency, and who's a good family friend. And as we were talking, and I was, he had lost his first wife, and then while he was in the state presidency, and then kind of found someone, got remarried, and we were having a conversation of how difficult it is out there. And, he said to me like 3 times in that conversation, don't settle, Joyce, don't settle. And so, like, what does that mean? Like, because don't settle might mean, I don't want to marry outside of the temple. That's a settling for me. Or I don't want to marry someone who's, not, doesn't have their own testimony. That might be settling. But I do think that because we live in this culture that does a couple of things. One, it puts a high value on attractiveness and less of a value on character. It also, I think the culture sort of has feminized men. And to the degree that often women think that they are stronger than, better than, just there's a constant, reinforcement for women as to they can do anything, like what is that Miley Cyrus song that I can buy myself flowers? Lovely sentiment in many ways. And as a person who's always been single, I'm glad that I can take care of myself, but like what I really want is a partner to go through life with, to be able to make covenants with. But it is hard to find because our culture is sort of done the separating of what the expectations are of men or how we feel about men and how we feel about women. And I think that makes it really tough. I think as much as we don't want it to, I think that gets into the church as well.
Well, I for one, am super glad that Miley Cyrus can buy herself flowers because I sure as heck wouldn't buy her flowers. But, each to their own on that one. I think you're right. It sort of brings up a couple of questions. One, I think, Joyce, you hit it directly on the head. What does settling look like? Because if you say, I don't ever want to settle, then you get messages like Elder Uchtdorf, where he says, look, if you're looking for perfection, you're not going to find it, and you're going to be looking all day. And then I love his little quip that he always says, if you're looking for perfection and you find it, do you think she'd really want you? Because you're not perfect, right? Like it makes sense. So the question is really kind of at what point do you quote unquote settle versus at what point are you maybe just adjusting what you're really looking for? Because I think you're right. Society has a way of romanticizing this whole thing. And I think sometimes we get really caught up in the Hollywood view of what this should look like. And I sometimes wonder if we could strip Hollywood away, take away all the movies, all that stuff, and just kind of go back 200 years or whatever, even 100 years where Hollywood was just starting, it wasn't pervasive in culture. Would we change what we're looking for each of us? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And I think sort of the tough question for me is because I really believe that what you need the most is to be equally yoked. That concept of, you need to be equally yoked, have similar energy, have similar goals, kind of want similar things for the future. And all the rest of the stuff can take care of itself if you can find that. But it's often hard to find. And the older you get before you get married, the harder that becomes to find. I think, wasn't there something like, I know that at singles conferences, when you go to singles conferences, I've heard someone say single conferences are planned by women for women. And so you don't get a lot of men there. And so often it's a 5-to-1 ratio. You've got 5 times the women. And so it can be really tough. Meanwhile, men who come to that conference are probably overwhelmed, because they've got so many women, not just to choose from, but who are probably clamoring for them. So, I think it's a challenge to kind of, that imbalance doesn't help either. Finding the person who's got all those qualities you want, there's probably 6 or 8 other women who have also sort of attached themselves to that guy.
And the cultural stances, and the guy usually asks the girl to marry, right? So it's like the guy's got all these females to choose from, which can be overwhelming. Right. And the girls stand around thinking, I wonder if I'll ever get chosen. Yep. And it is an interesting dynamic. I don't think any of us have like the correct answers for it all. But I do think that there are things that can be done to at least better your chances, widen your net a little bit when you're dating. Obviously, there are things that you don't want to bend on. Like Joyce was saying, I want to get sealed in the temple. I want someone with a strong testimony. Those are things, if that's what you really want, you need to not bend. But if it's like, I want someone with green eyes, or I need somebody who's, a girl that's size 2, or a guy that's 6'3", whatever. Those things we probably can just like back off a little bit, just like maybe have some space for movement. And the wider the net on things that really won't matter in the eternities, the better opportunities the Lord has to open up doors and stuff for us. But
I think that there's also things that are well-meaning that have grown into the church that seem like good ideas at face value, but really are not in congruence with the gospel. For example, the idea that everyone always should wait till they're ready, right? Wait to get married till you're ready. Wait to have a child till you're ready. Don't do it before you're done with school. I want my daughter to serve a mission just like my son. She shouldn't get married until after her mission, right? Those types of ideas of wait till you're ready, they're not gospel based, like they're world based, right? Like the gospel never said good things come to those that wait, right? The gospel said follow a covenant path, right? Good things come to those that work. Good things come to those that network, and are able to create relationships where they're able to find environments where they can interact with other people and find potential partners. And so I think that we rob ourselves with the wait till you're ready mindset, and that's very pervasive in the church. I know for a fact that with the young people I work with in the church, if I quoted President Hinckley and talked about how the women in the church, that their primary role and their primary priority should be marriage and family, and that it's a more holy calling than missionary, people would cringe at that. They'd be very bothered by that. But I know that doctrinally, I'm sound. Whereas the men, they're all called to be missionaries if they can be. The doctrine on that, the instruction on that hasn't changed, but it's something that culturally we've changed away from.
It absolutely has, because I remember when my daughter went to BYU, she got sent home early because of COVID because she had asthma. So she still, the church sent her paperwork. She'd completed her mission, but it was shorter than the 18 months. But a lot of the guys up there, a lot of the RMs are like, I'm only marrying a girl who's been on a mission. And even though she had been, and even though she had been sent home, there were some who still were like, no, you didn't do 18 months. And I do think that those are kind of toxic traits that have been woven into our society and our culture as a church. And we really, really need to unravel that. I am that just needs to just be unraveled and let go, because there is nothing more toxic than that in our church. Like, it's horrible. It's not a good thing.
Well, and it also, the other thing that I think sort of compares is, if you do a lot of tracting on your mission, you'll come home and marry a hot wife. Like some of those really crazy things that people say, the more tracting you do, the hotter your wife is. And like, it's just such a silly, so you're not going to look at someone who's, not a Brazilian bikini model because you did so darn much tracting. Like, I mean, you just have to, you have to just be realistic. And likewise, I think, what's so interesting is there's this whole generation of people who came home from missions because of COVID. And does the Lord consider those complete? And if he does, why in the world should any of us? Because there are probably young men who will run into that same sort of thing. And it comes down to, it's not just about missions, it's about all kinds of things that we judge each other for, that we like. Here's another one I think we have to be careful of is, our assumption is that people who've never been married don't have children, but that's not always true.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's not always true. And so if you say, hey, I'm cool with someone who's never been married, but, oh gosh, they have a child. Oh, I'm going to make some assumptions about them. They obviously did something wrong at some point.
Because none of us, because all of us have never done anything wrong. So.
Right.
I haven't. I was an angel as a child.
Totally. Yeah. I think, honestly, I'm going to be this is total rabbit hole for like a millisecond, but somebody who has a child who's never been married and they are active in the church, kudos to them, because I know that was a hard, tough battle to get and stay in the church. So anyway, go ahead.
Right. Because whether they always were a member or whether they're a convert to the church with a child, like if we think it's tough being judged just because we're not married, imagine being judged because you're not married and you don't have a kid. Like, let's double down on that judgment. So.
Okay. So I did a little bit of research. I wanted to kind of do a psychology kind of view on this. Like, what might be some reasons why people either choose or are not yet married, because the singleness within our society and within our church is just rising. So I wanted to share, and before I go into this is a disclaimer. I recognize this is not a blanket thing, right? This does not fit for everyone. But I think if all singles stop and just consider, do I fall in this category? is there something within this that I can use? Even if you have been married and you just find yourself single right now, there's a lot of good information on this. So I've got this that I wanted to share. So this is from Dr. Firestone from psychalive.com. And it says, when it comes to dating and the relationships, it's hard not to feel that you are a victim. After all, others can be cruel. You will get hurt. And no, it's not always your fault. But the reality is that we hold more power over our romantic destiny than we often think. To a great degree, we create the world we live in. Although we are rarely conscious of this process, we can in fact make a choice whether to see our fate through a victimized lens or choose to be goal-directed and take power over our lives. So this is kind of goes along with my coaching. I love to offer goals to people. I love to say, hey, I don't know why you're where you're at right now, but we can move forward in a certain direction toward the goals you want in your life. And let's do that. Let's see what we can do to get there. So this doctor went on to give top 8 reasons as to what might be a challenge that someone has who has not yet been married. So I'm just going to quickly go over those. And then if we want to talk on any of them, that's fine. But the first one is defenses. And obvious, right? If you've gone through a broken, engagement, multiple relationships, and none of them have ended in marriage, like you become defensive, like you're worried, you don't want to get hurt. So you might kind of pull back from someone who might be willing to open up to you. And so you're just afraid. And I think fear could be one of those situations that people are trying to overcome to move forward. Number 2 is unhealthy attraction. So if you've gone through even a horrible childhood or relationships, you might find yourself attractive to people who are actually not good for you, because then in the long run, it's not going to work out and they aren't going to hurt you. And there is a psychological connection to this keeps me safe because I know I'm not going to stay with this person because they're kind of not good for me. And again, I don't think this is like conscious thought. I think she's trying to say, are we attracted to someone who is not good for us because it's kind of a safety net in some ways? Fear of intimacy. And this did not talk about sexual intimacy. It just means intimate moments. Like, do you let people get inside your bubble? Will you let them come in? Because if you're not vulnerable and let them into your realm, then you can't get to the next spot. But the truth is, sometimes we're afraid, again, of getting hurt. So we kind of keep people on the outs. We keep them on the outside of our bubble because, hey, if you don't come in my bubble, you can't hurt me. And so those intimate moments, even sometimes, because that's why they're like, some people are just too nice. That guy was just too nice, or she was just too nice. She was just too friendly. And we almost push people away because that person who's too nice could actually end up being a really good spouse. And so the fear of them leaving or hurting us is enough to just push us away. Pickiness, we talked about this, is just widen our nets a little bit. We don't have to be so picky on things that don't matter in the long run. Low self-esteem, that's a given. I mean, that's what happens when you've been through relationships that are hard and can just be a strain on the way you view yourself and what you feel like you can offer others. Competition, this is one of those things where you look around and you think, I don't compete with these people. Maybe I feel like I don't fit the norm. I'm not thin. I'm not tall. I'm not blonde. I'm not whatever you think that everyone else is looking for. And so you just kind of choose to opt out because you feel like you don't compare and that you will in turn not get chosen. And then that hurts. And then, it's that whole spiral right there. Isolation and routine. And this is what we're talking about. Like, as we get older and we get into our routines, and what will happen if we add kids in? Joyce is like, I don't know. It'd be kind of crazy to add kids into my life. I'm just so used to just being alone and having my routines. And that's kind of scary. And so sometimes that stops people from like, and honestly, my mom growing up, she divorced when I was 5. And from that point on, one of the things that she said frequently was, I don't want someone to come in and tell me how to raise my kids. Like that was her line. And she said that I don't know how many times. And I think it's because you've got a routine. You know what to expect if you're in full control. As soon as you bring someone in, that messes up the routine and their control, and you have to kind of adjust. And then the last one was rule making. And this is, again, it's kind of like the list. I'm not going to ever date someone who didn't go on a mission. I'm not going to date someone who has never been married but has kids, because I've got these rules and I've got to keep them. So if you take all of those and if you combine them into one big ball, the majority of that is fear. Fear of getting hurt, fear of not being chosen, fear of what will happen if I do get married and there's a new routine. It's a lack of control. So this is where, we can focus on goal setting. You have complete control over your own personal goals. And then talk about the area of circle control, what you can control, what you can't, and just be kind of open to being vulnerable. And that's hard, but so that was her take on it. At the end, at the core, it's like, just try not to have fear, try to be more vulnerable, try to get yourself outside your comfort zone and set goals for your personal life. Because when you choose to make this dating scene not so dating-fied, but more like goal-oriented, you'll have much better success. And you'll feel better just as a person, because you'll become a better representation of who you are. You'll be able to share with others who you are better. So anyway, that's what I had to share. So.
Well, and Celeste, kind of as you were going through those, I'm like, I identify with like just all of them. But the good news is that we can change all of them. Like it's not like we're not stuck in that rut and in that path. We can change that. I have a good friend whose sister was never married until she was 50. It's 53, I think, maybe, and happy as can be. He says it's maybe the happiest marriage in their family. And so it can happen, you can find that. But one thing I'll say that's kind of along those same lines for me, one of the decisions I made a long time ago was, and it's hard to do sometimes, but we have to be able to make room in our life if we want someone to fill that space. And I think too often we fear loneliness so much, we fear that aloneness so much that we fill it up with a lot of other things. And so like isolation and routine, I really relate to that because, my job became the primary thing. And I've had a lot of callings in the church that took a lot of my time. And so I feel like I let that become isolation and routine. And I made a decision that I need to start to make room in my life. And so that means I can't be out with my girlfriends every Friday night if I actually want a date. Like you've got to be able to have room and availability to have someone else in your life. So that's kind of the key thing for me that I'm working on is making sure that there's room for someone to be part of my life, because it's been really easy when you feel ignored or invisible, which you often do in the church when you're single. And even more so when you're never married, because you don't have families that you connect to through children. You got to be able to you've got to be able to get out there and make yourself more visible.
And I love how you're
in your life.
I love how you're being self-reflective. And I know that you had wanted to talk about being honest in your self-reflection. Like, where am I? All of us, or all singles, should probably be doing that. Even married people need to stop. Where am I in this relationship? And what part do I play? What do I have control over? And I love that you're reflecting on that. And that's not a sign of weakness. That's a sign of strength. Right. And I think that sometimes people fear, if I stop and think, hey, which of these, even if we go over those 8 that were offered by Dr. Firestone, I don't want to admit to any of those, because that's tough. That's a vulnerable thing. But you know what? That shows strength. If I need to not be so picky, maybe I need to widen my net, whatever it might be. That just shows you're stronger.
Chris, you've been sitting awfully quiet, patient during this, and you're always opinionated.
Yes, he is.
I want to get your thoughts on all these things, because I know you're the gears are turning. I can see them.
So the big thing that I've been noticing, and when somebody asks me about what I'm looking for, the characteristic that I think I've needed more than anything, or I've identified that I need more, and Joyce and Celeste, actually, you guys do this fantastically well in the time that I've known you. Is now, Everett, you don't do this as well, and I understand why you don't do it as well, because you're trying to be funny. But you'll see what I mean as soon as I say it.
Okay, that's all right. I'm good. I'm open for criticism later.
Yeah. So, but you are being funny. I don't think that you're being mean spirited as I say this. Is as people get older and they've dealt with those struggles and disappointments of being single, they want to be so cautious that they don't always assume positive intent in the person, in what someone's saying. Now, Celeste and Joyce always do. Like, I can say something that's very opinionated, and they never assume that I'm, like, on the other side. Now, Everett, I've seen you, like, do it where it's the type of thing, and Everett, you're going to know you do this, because when somebody will say something, you'll do the, and I don't know that you use this line, but it's this idea of, so what you're saying is, and then, like, turn it into something that they're not saying.
A little joke.
And and you'll make jokes. So, I mean, I don't want you to think that I'm, like, ripping you when I say that
that's
they
okay.
do it better than you.
I can take the criticism.
Yeah, but people need to be really cautious about doing that early on in a serious way, where they're seeing everything as red flags, right? Where instead of them thinking that we're on the same team here and there's a reason why this person said this, and there's they're meaning it in a positive way and they're meaning it in a building way, they're assuming it's negative. They're assuming it's a red flag. And I really need to find someone that
isn't assuming.
Yeah.
Well, Jane Austen in Pride and Prejudice uses a phrase that I love, and she refers to willful misunderstanding. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about. And I love that idea, that willful, like you hear something and you want to misunderstand, like you take it personally on purpose. And so I totally hear what you're saying. Yeah, absolutely.
There's a great scene in the movie A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe and Jennifer Connelly, where when they're falling in love and they're younger, he says something that's kind of awkward, something that I think is kind of nerdy. And she chooses to make an adjustment in her head and say, this is how I'm going to interpret this, even though it's not the way that the smooth, charming guy would have said it to me. And I thought that moment, that small moment, was just such a beautiful one about what people should look for in a partner, because you will make errors that it just doesn't come out right. I mean, I'm definitely somebody that, because of the ideas that I have and because I'm willing to open up about the way that I'm spitballing ideas and brainstorming, there's going to be ideas that I say that it's just not going to fit right because it was version number one. It was the first draft.
It was rough draft. They said, look,
so do you preface it when you're telling them something and say, okay, this is my rough draft idea? You don't hold it against me.
Yeah, but you can't do it on a first date.
That text was just a draft text.
That's right.
You know what I love about that, though, Chris, is what you're sharing, is that I think what it's stating is that if there needs to be an open communication. So if you said something and someone kind of is like, wait, what? And they choose to take it as an offense, they can do one of two things. They can be offended, or, well, I guess so there's three. They can just assume, what is his intent here? You know, if I take the whole conversation as a whole, what are we trying to get at? Or what should be the best option is to reflect and ask, hey, you know, when you said that, I kind of understood it this way. Am I correct? And then it gives someone the space to correct. Oh, no, that's not how I meant it. You know, this is kind of what I meant. I worded that wrong. And if you're in your relationships, if you're willing to not go straight to offense, if you're willing to give that space for like, hey, maybe that's not how they meant it, or maybe I misunderstood it wrong, or, you know, whatever, and you go to communicate and ask for that clarification, that will benefit any relationship. So yeah, we can't be just assuming things like that.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And so I know we're kind of low on time, but there's one point that I really wanted to make, and that is that, you know, for many of us who've never been married, I think that we have to be careful not to let ourselves believe we can't be happy if we're not married, because in truth, you absolutely can be happy. You know, I did a little bit of research, and there was a study that was done in Australia on women who were single, never been married at age 70, never married, no kids at age 70, and kind of how they were doing. Turns out they're doing pretty good, you know, like better outcomes than many other categories. And so my point of view is that I want to find someone who will make my life better, but I don't have to spend every day being miserable because I'm not married. And so I put that out there just to say, you know, if you're not married and you're not happy about it, well, then do some things to change that. But the truth is, some of us will never get married in this life. It's just by the numbers, just by the statistics, that's likely to happen to some people. And it is not the end of the world. And you can still be happy, and you can still have, people who are important to you in your life. And, you know, there's just a lot of things that can make your life happy despite the fact that you're not married. Do we want to? Is it part of our eternal destiny? Absolutely. But, you know, we're promised that if we're doing everything we can, that we're going to be fine.
Yeah. So I did want to kind of touch on one part of this conversation, or this topic, I guess, rather, before we end it tonight. And Celeste and I were talking about this earlier today. And Chris, I'll start off asking you this question. Do you think it's harder for men or for women who have never been married when you're searching for a spouse? And why?
It's harder for the vast majority of men. So there's going to be a very small percentage of men that have all the options that all the women want. But those guys end up being like terrible because they have all the options. So why would they want to commit to like one girl that's a 6, right? And then that girl feels like terrible about herself because she's been cheated on and all this kind of stuff. So for those guys, it's A6, right? It's great. But for normal guys, it is way harder because we live in a world where anytime a guy tries to live up to the expectations of what men should be, they're beaten down and told that they're being toxic. They have an infinite list of things and characteristics that they can't achieve. And yet it's positive to try to achieve them, right? Like we should be striving for greater competency in our life. And I really think that the sooner that most guys can take frustrations and disappointments and turn them into motivation and humor to improve, that's a great way forward, right? Like we need to, when you look at the guys in this world, you can tell how hard it is because so many of the terrible things are overwhelmingly male, right? Deaths of despair, suicide, drug overdose, all overwhelmingly male. I don't want to say all male. If you look at mental illness and homelessness, it's overwhelmingly male, right? So guys are having a tough time out there. And I guess for any guys that might be listening, the message that I'd want them to take away is understand that we're supposed to grow through challenges and tragedies in our lives. That's part of the plan. And you shouldn't think that something's wrong with you because you face challenges and tragedies. Just know that quitting on it isn't the right answer, right? Like it's better to go out and, you know, I can deal with somebody that tries and fails. It's really hard for me to deal with somebody that fails to even try. And so, yeah, I think that it's a lot harder for guys in this world because every girl out there is going to be told that, you know, anything she does deserves to be praised. But guys get the reality slap in the face all the time to say like, no, you're a loser. If you start telling that to girls, there's going to be a whole legion of people online that are going to try and cancel you. And so I think it's tougher for guys. Sorry, that's a little long-winded.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. You got some
you got an
people
amen.
who agree with you in there. Well said.
Yeah, and I'm going to just weigh in on the same question, Everett, because I agree with a lot of what Chris has said. And I do think that there tends to be a bit of a double standard. And so, you know, I think people are like, oh, he wasn't married, there's something wrong with him. You get less of that, still some of that, but less of that with women. But I think that the challenge for women is just it's the supply demand issue, which is quite a bit harder, and for active men in the church, there's an abundance of supply of women. Whether they're the right women, that's another question. But for active women in the church, there is just not enough men to go around. And so the challenges are different. But I certainly agree with Chris's point of view. But I do think it's also like, it is tough for women because they also don't usually do the asking. And so they're kind of, it's only so much that you can do, that you can control. But it just is a supply and demand issue.
Sure. And I agree with that, Joyce. And so for the women listening on that side, right? Whenever I talk to somebody and they're like, hey, I'm having a tough time, dating or using these apps or these dating websites or whatever, the thing that I encourage them to do is open up their pool a little bit, right? Like generally women are going to match with, or they're going to swipe right or offer to match with about 4.5% of the guys on these sites, right? That's a real small percentage. And for those guys, it's great. But then it's a supply and demand issue that you just talked about, right? If they would just give 10% or 20% of the guys a chance, that would give them a whole bunch of guys that would probably really appreciate you, because they're not the guys that get every girl saying yes to them. And so I think that this is where the pickiness thing happens, right? Where it's like, just open up that window a little bit, and you're going to find guys that, maybe you pass on them because of their height. Maybe you pass on them because of their, whatever, some stupid picture they took with their buddies that they posted on their dating app that they shouldn't have. Like whatever reason, whatever, they said something cheesy in their bio, right? Like, if you just gave that guy a chance, it's probably normal and isn't actually like a creepy weirdo. He's probably a normal dude that's just a little bit awkward. That guy's going to be aces for you, because he's going to really appreciate that you picked him.
Yeah. There is no doubt that the more you widen your net on things that are not, eternal, in nature, the more opportunities the Lord has to work in your life. There's no doubt about that. So
Yeah. And I think another area to widen the net is to get off of, not off of the dating sites, but to get outside of the dating sites and be looking in other, doing things you enjoy, and, meeting people that way. It's tough to do when you're on the East Coast and there just aren't that many, but sort of getting the chance to actually meet face to face. Because I think one of the challenges you're right, Chris, like, you might put a bad picture out there and everybody's just missing out on a really great opportunity. Whereas if you meet someone in person, it's going to be a whole different dynamic.
Yep.
So I'm a big believer, get out there.
I wanted to share something with you guys, kind of going back to what you were just talking about with there being kind of like a ratio imbalance. You guys can see this, right? So when you hover over, it sort of shows, this is a Time magazine article that was actually about Jewish religion and Mormons, or Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We don't use that term anymore, right? But it's interesting when we look here at kind of the gender imbalance of what we could say, okay, there's more men to women. So if we're looking at just Utah, right? You see when I hover over it, 1.7 single women for every man. That's almost a 2-to-1 ratio.
Yeah.
Now you go up here to where I'm at, it's much closer to kind of the same 1-to-1 ratio, 1.2. Chris, you're in South Carolina, or are you just a Panthers fan? I can't remember.
I'm in South Carolina. I'm in Charleston.
Okay. All right. I knew it was there somewhere. So, you start looking around here. I'm getting close. I'm not 100% sure where I'm hovering over.
I think if you're in the next box down from where you're at.
This one?
Nope. Over a little bit to the coast. Nope. The other way.
Oh, this one right here.
Yeah.
There
I think that would be mine.
Okay. So now, again, when we're looking at this chart, 1.2 single women for every man. However, when we go up here and we change it to no college degree, and again, we're looking at 18 to 30. So we start kind of changing this demographic a little bit. Let's just go kind of more our age range, right? And say college degree. We look at Utah, it stays fairly similar, right? 1.6 instead of 1.8. Chris, you start going here. I mean, dude, your chances are going up. You know what I mean? You're almost
and hover over Maryland, would you?
Maryland,
it's interesting.
Maryland is probably bright pink. So yeah,
this kind of goes along with what Chris had said, that sometimes when women have a college degree, they're like, I don't want to get married because they don't, they don't have that quote need for someone to care for them and take care of them. And you can see there's a lot more bright pink when you get that college degree in there. So
and again, that's one of those things where like it's sad because the direction of the world is just incorrect and wrong. Right. The nature of men, and it's remained actually pretty consistent even with all these changes in our society, is men work really hard and build lives and earn incomes, so hopefully they are worthy of a family. There are some men out there that just want to party and be bachelors. That's true. But overwhelmingly, the guys that I know, right, they want to have a stable enough life and earn a livelihood to where they can provide for their family. Most of them don't expect their wives to have to contribute, right? If she makes a little bit of money, right, it's a nice bonus, right? But most guys' desire is to take it all on themselves. The difference is with college-educated women, overwhelmingly the idea is I'm independent, so I don't need a man. Right.
Well, no. So I'm going to jump in and say something to that, Chris, because I don't need a man to pay for things for me, but that doesn't mean that women have, I don't need a man, because, I will say on the opposite side of that, as a woman who's done well in my career, because I haven't gotten married, not that it was my priority, but it's really discriminating when I find that men aren't as interested in me because I've succeeded in my career. That's so not fair.
Yeah.
Because I didn't do it to like run men off. I didn't do it. I did it because I worked hard while I was waiting to find that right person. So
sure. And I don't think that you've done any of that wrong, but I don't think it's just about buying someone things. I think that like there's more and more of a message, and it's an adversarial message. It's an antagonistic message between men and women that they don't want to like, whether you want to say it's the adversary or if it's just modern academia or whatever, modern philosophy, right? It's not just what you're doing where you're saying, hey, I need to be able to provide for myself because I'm not married. A lot of it too is saying, hey, you don't need a man for all the other things. Yeah. Right. And I think that Taylor Swift is having a massive concert tour right now. She's an absolutely negative influence on the women of this world, right? Because she's telling them all the things that will cause them to fail, right? You shouldn't take every relationship that you have and blast it out to the world and bash on the person that you were just with, right? Like, I shouldn't sit down for a dinner with someone, and when we talk about past relationships, every single one of their exes is toxic. That doesn't make sense. Yeah. But that's where the virtue signaling has gone in our world. And so Taylor Swift makes billions of dollars literally to go get women riled up and told that all men are trash and bums and scrubs, and that they can do it all themselves. And they just have to get together with their girlfriends and put all their purses in the middle and take their shoes off and dance all the night away. Right? That's not a cohesive idea for creating paired relationships.
Now, I agree. My last comment here is I 100% agree. Satan is in every aspect of this, in society, in our doubts and our fears, in, men being, you can't be real men, and women, you don't need men. I mean, it's just such a mess. And it's the last days, and Satan is having a heyday. And that's why we need to just kind of stand firm, don't judge, let go of the stereotypes, and truly focus on gospel teaching when it comes to marriage, when it comes to roles. Look at the family proclamation, kind of pray over it. Like, that's the type of person you want, because that's where that we should be, despite where society tells us where we should be. So that's That's my final words.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. You know, to be honest with you, this is a discussion that I think we should have again, because I don't think we got to the bottom of everything we wanted to discuss tonight. We have more things and more quotes and more statistics to go over that we just don't have time to cover everything. We're already over. But Chris, first and foremost, thank you very much for agreeing once again to come on and talk about this topic. I know it's one that it can be a little bit sensitive. So thank you for just being vulnerable and being here. Same with you, Joyce. I really appreciate it. You guys are awesome.
No one's ever accused me of being sensitive, so.
Oh, I'm sure it's in there somewhere.
Well, and I'm an open book, so I just put it all out there.
I know Chris has an extra padding in his chair just so his sensitivity is fine.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's.
No,
Awesome.
Thank you guys very much. Thank you for everybody for joining us tonight. And for those who are looking to join us in the after party, please look in the comment section. We posted the link to the after party, and we're hoping to see you there right after this. So everybody,
the Zoom link is also in the invite. So if you didn't catch it and you can't get to the Zoom information here, it's in the invite. If you go kind of look in the details on Facebook, you'll find it there. So we hope you'll join us.
Yes, thank you, everybody. We really appreciate having you on tonight. Again, thank you. If you have not done so, one last time, subscribe to our YouTube channel, give us a like, give us a thumbs up, and hit the notification bell, because we are posting new videos all the time and going live. So hope to see you in the after party. Until next weekend, thank you, everybody, and have a great night.
Bye.